Welcome to Beat Diabetes, and we're going to continue in our series on books and quotes. Today's book is a continuation of Jenny Rule's book called Blood Sugar 101, What They Don't Tell You About Diabetes. It's really an excellent book. It is not a new book. It's been around since 2008, I think. So I got hold of it, I don't know, maybe 2010, 11, somewhere around those lines. Was already a confirmed low carber. But I learned quite a bit, and I marked up this book a lot. So you can kind of tell how much I like a book by how many marks I put in it. That's why I don't really like the Kindle books so much, especially if it's something I want to do a program about, because you can't really mark them. I know you can highlight things, but it's just not the same as just quickly flipping through the pages and checking out the marks. So today we want to talk about studies, a couple of studies that she brings up. That I think are very significant. And one has to do with the pattern with which diabetes develops. Now, many of you watching this video, you've already been there. You've crossed that border into diabetes. Many of you have already come back away from that border, and you're back in the land of non-diabetes, according to the numbers. But it's important for all of us to understand how it develops and how long it develops, and why people can be fooled, so easily fooled by this one phenomena that she's going to bring up in this first study. This is a study of middle-aged people in Baltimore called the Baltimore Longitudinal Study of Aging. And they studied people over 10 years, middle-aged people, not youngsters. And out of the people they studied, 52% developed abnormal blood sugars over those 10 years. So a little over half. And here's the interesting thing, not just that lots of people get prediabetes and diabetes and abnormal blood sugar, that we know that's not any great revelation, but how they do it is significant. And here's what she says. She says, by far the most prevalent pattern of blood sugar deterioration found in the group that started having runaway blood sugar was the development of impaired glucose tolerance with normal fasting blood sugar. Now, let me say that again. The development of impaired glucose tolerance. You can't deal with glucose and carbs well, but normal fasting blood sugar. Your blood sugar is not diabetic. And what they found was that is more oftentimes than not the pattern. You can have a relatively normal fasting blood sugar. Probably you're not going to be in the 80s or low 90s. But, you can go to the doctor and he can check your blood sugar, and if it says 100, 102 as a fasting blood sugar, he'll oftentimes, or she will oftentimes tell you you're fine because you're not anywhere close to 126 milligrams per deciliter, which is the diabetic standard for fasting blood sugar that makes you a diabetic. So your blood sugar is normal, but you've got problems. And she says the problems they typically have is their post-meal glucose spikes. She and I are very similar, very much alike in terms of being very concerned about glucose spikes. She says, it is far more common for post-meal blood sugar response to deteriorate before fasting blood sugar becomes impaired. In other words, the normal thing that's going to happen to you, your blood sugar is starting to run away from you. It's jumping. And you're getting way too high glucose spikes after your meals, but your fasting blood sugar is on the normal side. Again, not necessarily in the 80s, but it's not anything a doctor would be concerned. Most doctors would not. And so this is the predictor more than anything else of where you're headed metabolically. Are you headed to the land of diabetes? Well, how are you doing with high carbohydrate meal? And she strongly recommends these oral glucose control tests where they give you the sweet liquid and see how high you bump up. Normally, you shouldn't bump up past 130, 140 max when you have a lot of carbs. And she goes on to say, if you can't afford or it's too much trouble to go to the doctor and get one of these oral glucose control tests, you can do your own, which is eat a high-carb meal, deliberately eat a high-carb meal, and then test your blood sugar about an hour to an hour and a half afterwards and see how far it jumps. If your blood sugar jumps up to 130 or so, you're doing pretty well. If it's getting past 150, you're not doing well. And if it's close to 200, you're in real trouble. And still, your blood sugar may be pretty much normal, which was the case for me for quite some time. When I was having runaway blood sugar and I was about to pass out, and the doctors would test my glucose, and my A1C was still in the relatively normal range, and my fasting glucose was not diabetic. And they're like, well, no, you're fine. No, I wasn't fine at all because I couldn't handle carbs and sugars. All right. She talks about the people who had blood sugar that was bouncing way too high after meals. As a group, they deteriorated and were so much worse than the other group. She says this makes it very clear that the deterioration of glucose tolerance is often the only apparent sign a person is heading toward diabetes. For most people, the fasting blood sugar stays normal long after mealtime control has faded out. You've lost control of your post-meal blood sugar. It's all over the place, but most people don't even know it because they don't test themselves. And so they go to the doctor. Well, doctor, I get these shaky feelings, or I feel kind of strange these days, and I'm having certain symptoms, and I've got arthritis, and I wonder if this has to do with diabetes. What does he do? A1C, not too bad, 5.5, or maybe it's in the pre-diabetic 5.8, 5.9, 6.0. He says, well, you need to kind of watch it, but you're not diabetic yet. Or he takes your fasting glucose, and it reads 102. He says, oh, no, you don't have anything to worry about. You're not even close to 126. But you've got metabolic problems, serious problems, and that's indicating you are headed for the land of diabetes. You just haven't crossed the border officially. But there's really two pieces of bad news in this scenario. If you've lost control of being able to handle those spikes, and you're spiking all over the place after high carb meals, there's a couple of problems. Number one, you're headed toward diabetes. Number two, you will not even have to wait for diabetes in many cases to start having all kinds of problems. UTIs, irritable bowel syndrome, arthritis, and all kinds of other ugly things, along with developing heart issues. So a lot of times we think, well, until that doctor comes to me and says you are diabetic, I'm in the clear. No, you may not be in the clear at all. You may already be dealing with symptoms. And people have left comments for me and emailed me and told me even before I was diagnosed diabetic, I had all kinds of health issues because your body is just not happy and comfortable with those high glucose spikes and the corresponding high insulin, which is a problem all by itself. Your body's surging with insulin all over the place. Insulin in small amounts is perfect. You need it. You got to have it. It's great. It's a gift from God. But insulin spiking like crazy and then dropping and then spiking and then dropping, along with glucose spiking and dropping, spiking and dropping, it is a major problem. And yet you go to the doctor. Fasting glucose looks okay to me. A1C, well, could be better, but you're not diabetic, not even really that close. So this study shows, if you've got spiking glucose after meals, you've got a problem. The only way you'll know that is to either test your blood sugar or go and get an oral glucose control test. And like she said, the poor man's version of an oral glucose control test is simply to eat a big old high carb meal, have macaroni and cheese and a baked potato, and have a apple pie for dessert with some ice cream on top, and maybe even have a soda afterwards, and then test yourself. If you're up to 195, 200, 225, I don't care how good your fasting glucose tests are or how wonderful your A1C is, you've got some issues and you need to be careful. The problem is most people, not only do they have these issues, they don't even go to the doctor because they feel fine. Or if they do go to the doctor for a regular checkup, fasting glucose 105, well, you might want to be a little bit careful. A1C 5.7, well, you're starting to get up, but you're not too bad. And then in addition to this study, she mentions a second study that goes right along with it. This one was done in Mexico City, and they looked at a large population over a period of time living in Mexico City who seemed to be at risk for diabetes, and they tested their A1Cs and their glucose levels every 3 years. So they went along quite some time, and they just had them come back every 3 years. Let's do another test every 3 years, every 3 years. Here's what they found. She says, the researchers found that rather than being a gradual process, the transition to diabetes appeared to occur very quickly within a single 3-year period, and it was characterized by a sudden and very swift increase in fasting glucose values. So what they found was, you go along for years and everything seems to be okay, A1C okay, fasting glucose okay, and then suddenly it's like the dam breaks. And the next time you come in 3 years later, you've got raging diabetes. You've got an A1C of 10. You've got a fasting glucose of 175. And 3 years ago, you were in relatively good shape with no problems. You weren't diabetic at all. Now you're a raging diabetic. In 3 years' time, I'll go you one further. From people's comments that they've made to me, it can happen in 1 year's time or 2 years' time. You go from non-diabetic to seriously diabetic. Not just that you've crossed over the border just by a mile or two or a kilometer or two. You're way into the land of diabetes. What in the world happened? Well, it has to do with that first study. Your fasting glucose is okay. Your A1C is okay. You think you're okay, but your metabolic system is in the process of collapsing and breaking down. But like a dam with all the water building up behind it, you don't notice. You don't notice there's a crack here and there's a crack there and there's a small leak here and there's a small leak there. You just don't notice it. And suddenly the dam breaks. The dam collapses and the water comes pouring forth. And you're thinking, how in the world did I get to be this serious of a diabetic when 2 years ago the doctor told me I really wasn't anywhere close to diabetes? Well, that's why you just have to watch yourself. And that doesn't just include people that are diabetic, pre-diabetic, or even below pre-diabetes. When you reach middle age, there's a good chance, if you're eating normally, if you're just eating the normal American diet, British diet, Australian diet, African diet, the normal diet, Indian diet, Chinese diet. If you're eating the normal diet, there's an excellent chance once you pass into that land of the 40s and you reach the age of 40 or more, you could be in trouble. But you should do more than just check carefully and see how your spikes are doing and test your blood sugar and have the doctor check you frequently. That's good. But you should do something more. You should start easing up on the gas with eating all those carbs and sugars, even if you don't seem to have any problems, knowing how serious a danger they are. So again, these two tests are incredibly valuable. The first test says your fasting glucose and A1C may be very fine, but you're breaking down, you're falling apart. The second test shows that diabetes can come at you suddenly, within a short time, within a year, 2, 3 years, and you can go from non-diabetic to raging diabetes. So be careful, test yourself, and ease up on the gas when it comes to eating carbs and sugars. In fact, eliminate sugar altogether and lower those carbs significantly. Be wise so you don't go way inland into the land of diabetes. Your body will thank you for it. And you may just extend the years of your life, and almost certainly you will extend the healthy years of your life. If you've recently been diagnosed with diabetes and you've just discovered this channel, let me recommend that you go to our Uploads page, which will give you access to every diabetic video we've posted since we began. As you work your way through all our videos, I believe you'll find the help you need. A link to our Uploads page is in the description.